I'm not a big fan of the Warriors types of games. Although, unlike my good yet naive friend, the Synergy333, I was aware of the series before Hyrule Warriors ever existed. In fact, I used to own Dynasty Warriors 4 for the PS2. I didn't get far since not long after I got it, I lent it to a neighbor and he scratched it. Damn it. So all I could ever play was the first level and not much of it, since after a certain point, no enemies would spawn anywhere. Either way, I played with all of the characters and even created my own. It was fun, if repetitive and easy, which is something that hasn't changed from what I hear. So when a new Berserk game using this formula was announced at E3 2016, my hype was off the charts, seeing as how I was never able to play a Berserk game before, yet the 90s version is my second favorite anime of all time. So yeah, I was excited. So let's load it up and start this bitch. This looks worse than I thought. Wait, wrong thing, my bad. I put in the new anime version for the sake of a shitty gag. Okay, here we go. The story is more or less an abridged version of the entire story minus the Fantasia arc. You go through the majority of the arcs minus the Lost Children arc and a heavily reduced Black Swordsman and Guardians of Desire arcs. It's a little difficult to go over the story as it's just the story of Berserk and nothing original. What I can go over is how the story is presented though. The Golden Age arc is mostly what everyone's familiar with, going through the early career of Guts and the Band of the Hawk. Most of the story is told through the scenes from the Berserk Golden Age movies, with only the occasional pre-rendered cutscene. While heavily censored, which can cause problems for context, it does a good enough job of explaining what is happening and why Griffith is a fuckwad. Throughout the game, we do get optional story moments to flesh characters and lore out more, which is fun in my book. However, once the story padding of the Golden Age arc ends, the story for the rest of the game is a little more lax. Characters and themes that were prominent in their respective arcs are heavily reduced or completely gone. Some can be a case of censorship, or they felt it was just not important, but the important themes are lost because of this. The amount of big cutscenes is also reduced. Now, the important cutscenes that are used in the in-game engine look pretty damn good, but they are few and far between. The Conviction arc feels very rushed, and it feels like they're missing big moments that should be there. It's better than this, I guess, but even that had more important moments in it. It just doesn't feel as fleshed out as the Golden Age arc in this. The Hawk of the Millennium arc is handled a little better, but still feels way too short, which you can clearly see with a surprisingly easy final boss and unsatisfying ending. I mean, there wasn't much they could do, but it feels rushed. I'm just glad they let that how trolls procreate. The biggest problem with the story, besides censorship and lost moments, is that quiet moments and character progression are not really there or feel forced. Seeing as how this is a big, crazy Japanese action game, it makes sense that story would be reduced, but this hurts immersion in this world. You know, if everything else already hasn't. It really feels like they focused most of the story on the arc that everyone knows by heart by now. Which shouldn't be the case. Not to mention continuity issues that pop up from time to time. I feel like they should show more of the stuff many people might not be familiar with. I would say the story is a good gateway for getting people into the story of Berserk, but should not be the main way to learn of the story from this game. The graphics are also hit and miss. Character models are the best looking thing in the game, which is good seeing as how you'll be looking at them a lot. Certain particle effects are also good, such as blood and sword swings look good, but stuff like explosions look early PS3 worthy. Dialogue animations can also be added here. Cutscenes and gameplay animations look smooth and mostly natural, but most in-game cutscenes have characters slowly moving their head, sliding their bodies in a way too goofy motion. Huh? And anything the designers didn't want to model, say a torture or killing, it's done off-screen with a sound effect instead. The environments don't really help. Most environments are barren, flat pieces of land. This series hasn't advanced so much. They're boring, uninteresting, and while serving a purpose, are bland to look at. It does get better as the game progresses, since the narrative makes Guts travel everywhere, but most early stages you'll see more than 3 times. There are unique areas toward the end of the game that do give more unique slopes and look visually appealing, which does help, but the environments are not that strong. The gameplay. If you played one Warriors game, you've played them all. You have a weak attack and a strong attack. You can mix them up for combos, but nothing too intricate. You can take down way too many enemies in one or two attacks. The combat is very mashy and doesn't take really any skill at all. You do have items to use and super attacks that can obliterate many enemies, and some characters can transform as well, so there is some depth, but if you're expecting a huge hack and slash with depth, yeah, no, sorry. Shit out of luck. Even though you have multiple characters to play as, the number is incredibly small. 8. Fucking 8! In a Warriors game. Ugh. Anyway, most levels are mission-based, which does give a bit of freedom, but since the entire game is one mechanic with little to no varying style of gameplay to break it up, it can become tedious very fast. This gameplay style does work for big war moments, as it does feel like you are in a war with the massive amounts of enemies to face, but it does ruin a bit of how Berserk works. While a fantasy world, most human characters are still human and work the same way we do, so killing 5 enemies could be tough enough as it is, yet you can slice through pretty much continents worth of people within a few minutes. This can also make some things jarring. Say a cutscene where only a few people are shown to attack, and when you get to gameplay, wow, their war funds drastically increase in the span of 4 seconds. Or the legendary moment where Guts takes down 100 men by himself is unimpressive since you got down hundreds of people in the first level alone. However, it can still be fun. It does get boring, don't get me wrong, but when you're causing bodies to fly and leaving huge amounts of destruction in your wake in the span of a few seconds, it's very cathartic and doesn't get old, especially when you see the dismemberment you've caused. It was what makes gameplay fun despite nothing new happening. The worst part of gameplay is fighting on horses. Admittedly, you don't really have to use them unless you want to get somewhere fast, but combat on horseback is terrible. It's hard to hit anything and you only attack low, so any enemies on horseback become much harder to fight. You do level up and acquire items to help you out, but they are only really useful for handling bosses. Speaking of which, the boss fights are actually well done and a lot harder than I expected. There are some bosses that abide by franchise rules and are surrounded by mooks, but when shit gets real, most bosses are one-on-one. No bullshit to get in the way, just good old-fashioned one-on-one.
Bullshit, why are my attacks barely hurting him?
Yeah, when you face off against an apostle, they can be actually difficult. You can't just wail on them. You have to actually play a video game. Revolutionary. It is incredibly enjoyable, but can be cheap as sometimes their attacks go right through you, and you can only stun them with a super attack, which is hard to get, and even then they don't stay down long. They do have patterns, thank God, but it doesn't matter when they keep attacking and you have little to no breathing room. I'm glad Omega Force finally decided to program real boss fights, but you can tell that they need more practice. And despite covering the majority of the story of Berserk, they still put in some filler fights. There's enough battles as it is, while putting in more bandits are attacking sequences really help. That's called padding, not content. You do have a free mode in which you can play as the other characters, and a mission-based horde mode called Endless Eclipse. It's more the same, but really emphasizes the fun of tearing apart enemies in seconds. Its only real function, though, is just unlocking one character and multiple costumes, so it's a bit squandered. The lack of an English dub is actually a hindrance as well. Ignoring the weebs who hate the language they speak and need to understand anything, it would actually be beneficial to have English audio. Not only will we hear the English cast again, which is always a delight, plus listening to new ones, but it can be helpful for those moments that they decide to drop heavy exposition in gameplay. There are times when they decide to have heavy story moments in the middle of gameplay. Since we are focusing on fighting and the audio is only Japanese, it makes it really hard to read and fight. It's different than anime since you are only focusing on the screen, but here you are focusing on the controls, so reading that at the same time can be difficult. Plus, we could have gotten a translation editor. The music is fairly weak. There can be a couple of exceptions, say the Eclipse's creepy theme or Wild's chanting music, but otherwise the music is generic. I don't really know any of the themes that stood out. If the composer of the series, I'm gonna botch this, Susumu Hirasawa, had just helped out or at least provided one song, it could be made so much better. Compare this. to this.
Yai Forces. Yai Forces.
The final thing I want to touch on is the debate that From Software should have made this game. For me, honestly, yes and no. Most people say this since the Soulsborne games have massive influences and references to Berserk. I see why they can draw this connection, but unless they design a whole new system for Berserk, just slapping Berserk with the Soulsborne style would not work. The atmosphere and feeling would be perfect, but that's about it. The lack of people and towns also hinders that. Berserk's action scenes, while still fairly realistic, are much more over the top than anything in Soulsborne. Guts is very fast with a 600-pound slab of iron. Plus, there are plenty of times mooks just stand there waiting for someone to kill them, akin to warrior style, so that does fit as well. I think that what would work is best is a Dragon's Dogma type of game. Anyone remember that game? No? Oh, a few! That's good. Anyone else? Oh, it already has Golden Age armor in it. The aesthetic is pure Berserk. You can go on a journey with other people like Guts. The combat is real but much faster than Soulsborne. There are more people in the world, so it's not as bleak. And stronger enemies come out at night, like how the brand attracts demons at night. That's just my 2 cents. Feel free to ignore it. So yeah, it's repetitive, boulderized, lacking unique gameplay variety, feels rushed story-wise, yet I had fun and went back and still enjoyed it. It's got problems, sure, but I found it fun. I know it won't be for everybody, and it should not be the sole way you ingest the core story, but it is a fun, if mindless hack and slash to play. I give this game a 6 out of 10. Rage overpowers fear. Characters and themes that were prominent in their respective arcs are the gameplay. If you played one Warriors game, you've played them all. You have a weak attack and a strong attack. You can mix them up for combos, but nothing too intricate. You can take down way too many enemies in 1 or 2 attacks. The combat is very mashy and doesn't take any really... Fuck. I cannot speak. I am terrible at speaking. Why am I doing audio stuff, even though it's kind of fun? You do have a free mode in which you can play as the other characters, and a mission-based horde mode called Endless Eclipse. It's more the same, but really emphasizes the fun of tearing apart One more time. Plus, there are plenty of times mooks just stand there waiting for someone to kill them, akin to warrior style. So that dough fit... What? What did I write? So that dough fits as well. So that does... Come on. So that does fit as well. Come on, Adam.